Sarah Matthews wiped the sweat from her forehead as she counted the last of the coins in the wooden box. $23.47. That was all that remained of her family's life savings after her husband Thomas died from fever 3 months ago. The small trading post they had built together on the edge of Texas frontier territory was failing, and winter was approaching fast. She looked around the cramped store filled with goods nobody wanted to buy anymore. Bolts of fabric sat collecting dust, tools hung unused on the walls, and sacks of flour had begun to attract mice. The nearest town was 50 miles away, and fewer travelers passed through each month. The railroad was changing everything, taking business away from small outposts like hers. At 28 years old, Sarah had already buried a husband and lost 2 babies to illness. Now she faced a choice that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. She could pack up what little remained and try to make it back to her sister's family in Missouri. Or she could stay and somehow find a way to survive the harsh Texas winter alone. The sound of horses approaching made her heart race. Through the dusty window, she saw 3 Comanche riders dismounting near her well. Fear gripped her stomach, but she had learned that showing panic would only make things worse. The Comanche had been trading with settlers in this area for years, though tensions remained high after recent conflicts with the cavalry. The eldest rider, a man with graying hair and weathered skin, approached the trading post slowly. He wore traditional buckskin clothing, mixed with pieces of traded cloth. His eyes were sharp and calculating, taking in every detail of Sarah's desperate situation. Behind him, 2 younger warriors waited by their horses, hands resting casually near their weapons. Sarah opened the door and stepped outside, her hands visible and empty. She had learned enough Comanche words from other traders to manage basic conversations, though her pronunciation was still clumsy. The older man studied her for a long moment before speaking in heavily accented English. "You are the widow woman. Your husband. He traded fair with our people." His voice was deep and careful, choosing each word deliberately. "Now you are alone. This is not good for a woman in this place." Sarah nodded, unsure how to respond. The Comanche were known for their practical approach to survival. They rarely wasted time on pleasantries when serious matters needed discussion. She gestured toward the trading post, hoping to redirect the conversation toward business. "I have goods to trade. Coffee, sugar, blankets. What do you need for your people?" The old warrior shook his head slowly. "We have what we need for winter. But you have nothing that will keep you alive when the cold winds come. Your store is empty. Your food supplies are low, and you have no man to hunt or protect you." His words stung because they were true. Sarah had been trying to ignore these facts, hoping somehow she could make it through on her own determination. But reality was harder to face when spoken aloud by someone who understood survival better than most. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The warrior considered this question while studying her carefully. He walked around the trading post, examining the construction, testing the strength of the walls, looking at her small garden and water source. His companions remained by the horses, occasionally speaking to each other in their own language. When he returned, his expression had changed slightly. There was something that might have been respect in his eyes, or perhaps recognition of her desperate courage. "You have 3 choices, widow woman. You can try to return to your people in the east, but winter will catch you on the trail and you will die. You can stay here alone and freeze when your wood runs out and your food is gone. Or you can come with us." Sarah's heart stopped. Stories of white women taken by Comanche tribes filled the newspapers back east, usually ending in tragedy or rescue attempts that led to more violence. But something in the old warrior's tone suggested this was different. "What do you mean, come with you?" "Our band needs someone who understands the white man's trade goods, someone who can help us deal with other settlements. You know their language, their ways, their needs. In return, we would give you protection, food, shelter. You would become part of our people." The offer hung in the air between them like smoke from a campfire. Sarah understood she was being presented with a chance for survival, but it would mean abandoning everything she had ever known about her own identity and culture. She thought about Thomas, about the dreams they had shared of building a successful business on the frontier. She thought about the babies she had lost and buried in the small cemetery behind the trading post. Everything that had defined her life was connected to this place, but staying here would mean certain death. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. The old warrior nodded. "We will camp by the creek tonight. Tomorrow at sunrise you must decide. If you choose to come with us, bring only what you can carry. Leave the rest. The old life must die for the new one to begin. As the three riders moved toward the creek to make camp, Sarah returned to her empty trading post with her mind racing. She had perhaps 12 hours to make a decision that would determine whether she lived or died, and what kind of person she would become. The sun was setting, painting the sky deep orange and purple. Sarah lit her oil lamp and sat at the wooden table, where she and Thomas had shared so many meals, planned so many hopes for their future together. Now she faced a choice between clinging to a past that offered only death, or embracing an uncertain future with people she barely understood. Outside, she could see the flickering light of the Comanche campfire by the creek. Tomorrow would bring either her final day as Sarah Matthews, the settler's widow, or her first day as something entirely new. The thought terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. Sarah spent the night walking through her small trading post, touching objects that held memories of her former life. Thomas's coffee cup still sat on the shelf where he had left it the morning he fell ill. The quilt her mother had made hung over their bed, its colors faded from years of frontier sun and dust. Each item told a story of who she had been, but none offered a solution for who she needed to become. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, she made her decision. Survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant accepting that the woman she had been was already dead. The trading post, the memories, the dreams she had shared with Thomas, all of it belonged to a world that no longer existed for her. She packed quickly and practically. A spare dress, her strongest boots, a small knife Thomas had given her for protection, a few pieces of jewelry that might be useful for trade, and a leather-bound journal where she had recorded their business transactions. Everything else, the furniture, the remaining goods, the life she had built, would stay behind like a shed skin. The Comanche warriors were already breaking camp when she walked toward the creek carrying her small bundle. The old warrior looked at her approach without surprise, as if he had known what her choice would be before she did. "You have decided wisely," he said, taking her bundle and securing it to one of their pack horses. "Today you begin to learn what it means to survive like our people. It will not be easy and you cannot go back." One of the younger warriors brought forward a horse, not one of their swift war ponies, but a steady mare suitable for long travel. Sarah had ridden before, but never bareback in the Comanche style. The warrior showed her how to mount and maintain her balance, speaking to her in a mixture of English and Comanche words she would need to learn. "My name is Iron Bear," the older warrior told her as they prepared to leave. "These are my sons, Running Wolf and Swift Arrow. You will travel with our family group first, then meet the larger band when we reach winter camp. What shall we call you?" Sarah considered this question. Her old name belonged to her old life, but she wasn't ready to abandon it entirely. "Sarah," she said finally. "But I understand I may need a new name among your people." Iron Bear nodded approvingly. "Names must be earned. For now you will be White Doe, because you are learning to walk quietly in a new world." The small group rode away from the trading post as the sun climbed higher in the morning sky. Sarah didn't look back, though she felt the pull of everything familiar disappearing behind her. The rhythm of the horse's movement and the vast openness of the Texas landscape gradually calmed her racing thoughts. Iron Bear began her education immediately. He pointed out signs in the terrain that revealed the passage of other travelers, the locations of water sources, and the kinds of plants that could provide food or medicine. His sons demonstrated how to read the sky for weather changes and how to move through different types of country without leaving obvious trails. "White men move across the land like a storm," Iron Bear explained during their first rest stop. "They change everything they touch and make noise that can be heard for miles. Our people move like the wind, taking only what is needed and leaving the land unchanged." By midday, Sarah was already sore from the unaccustomed riding, but she didn't complain. These men were offering her a chance at life, and she understood that showing weakness might make them reconsider their decision. When they stopped to water the horses, Running Wolf showed her how to approach the animals without frightening them and how to check their feet for stones or injuries. "Horses are our legs, our speed, our freedom," he explained in careful English. "A warrior who cannot care for his horse will not remain a warrior for long." During the afternoon, they encountered a small group of white settlers heading east in 2 covered wagons. Iron Bear signaled for the group to stop and observe from a distance, hidden behind a low ridge. Sarah watched her former people through different eyes now, seeing how exposed and vulnerable they appeared on the open prairie. They travel like they own this land, Swift Arrow commented quietly, but they do not know it well enough to survive if their wagons break or their animals die. Sarah realized he was right. The settlers moved with confidence but little awareness of their surroundings. They made camp in a low area that would flood if it rained, and their cook fires sent smoke signals visible for miles. Everything about their journey advertised their presence and their inexperience. I used to think like them, she admitted to Iron Bear. We built our trading post in what seemed like a good location, but we never really understood the land or the weather patterns. We just hoped everything would work out. Iron Bear studied her face carefully. Hope is not a survival strategy. Knowledge, preparation, and the ability to adapt. These things keep people alive. You are beginning to learn this. As evening approached, they made camp in a sheltered area near a small stream. Sarah watched as the three men efficiently set up everything needed for the night. A small, nearly smokeless fire, sleeping areas protected from wind, and their horses secured where they could graze but not wander. Every action served a purpose, with nothing wasted on comfort or convenience. Iron Bear handed her strips of dried meat and some kind of cakes made from ground seeds and berries. The food was unfamiliar but nourishing, and she ate without complaint despite her exhaustion. Tomorrow we will reach the winter camp, Iron Bear told her as they settled around the small fire. There you will meet my wife, Singing Bird, and our daughter, Morning Star. They will teach you the women's skills you will need to survive. Some of our people may not welcome you easily. You must prove your worth through your actions, not your words. Sarah nodded, understanding that her real test was just beginning. Today had been about making the choice to survive. Tomorrow she would begin learning whether she had the strength and flexibility to become someone entirely new. As she lay wrapped in a blanket under more stars than she had ever seen from her trading post, Sarah Matthews felt herself changing already. The woman who had awakened that morning in her familiar bed was disappearing, replaced by someone whose story was just beginning to unfold. The winter camp appeared gradually as they crested a hill overlooking a protected valley. Sarah had expected something temporary and primitive, but what she saw challenged every assumption she had carried about Comanche life. Nearly 40 lodges were arranged in a careful pattern that took advantage of natural windbreaks and water sources. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played between the dwellings, and the whole settlement hummed with organized activity. This is home until spring, Iron Bear announced, though Sarah could hear pride mixed with caution in his voice. Our people have wintered in this valley for many generations. The old ones say the spirits here are friendly to those who treat the land with respect. As they rode down into the camp, Sarah felt dozens of eyes examining her. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, children paused in their games, and women looked up from their work to study the white woman riding with Iron Bear's family. Some faces showed curiosity. Others displayed obvious suspicion or hostility. An elderly woman emerged from one of the larger lodges and walked directly toward them. Her silver hair was braided with colored beads, and her clothing showed the intricate beadwork and decoration that indicated high status within the tribe. Sarah instinctively understood this must be someone important, possibly a leader among the women. Grandmother Spider, Iron Bear said respectfully, dismounting immediately and approaching the older woman with his head slightly bowed. His sons followed his example, showing deference Sarah had not seen them display before. The elderly woman studied Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She walked slowly around the horse, examining Sarah's clothing, her posture, and her general condition. When she spoke, her English was better than Iron Bear's, though she chose her words carefully. You bring a white woman to our winter camp, Iron Bear. This is not a decision made lightly. What do you see in her that makes you believe she can survive among us? Iron Bear glanced at Sarah before answering. She chose to come with us rather than die alone at her trading post. She has not complained about the hard riding or the unfamiliar food. She asks questions and listens to the answers. These are good signs. Grandmother Spider nodded slowly, but her expression remained skeptical. Good signs, yes, but winter will test more than her willingness to listen. Can she work with her hands? Can she learn our ways without trying to change them to suit her comfort? Can she put the survival of the group before her own desires? Sarah realized this was her moment to speak for herself. She dismounted carefully and approached Grandmother Spider with what she hoped was appropriate respect. I understand I must prove myself through actions, not words. she said. "I have lost everything I once knew, but I am willing to learn whatever you can teach me. I want to contribute to the survival of your people, not burden them." The old woman studied her face intently for several long moments. Around them, Sarah could feel the entire camp waiting for Grandmother Spider's judgment. Finally, the elderly woman spoke. "We will see. You will stay in the lodge of Singing Bird, Iron Bear's wife, and learn women's work. If you prove useful, you may remain through winter. If not—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Singing Bird approached from behind one of the lodges, and Sarah immediately understood why Iron Bear had been drawn to her. The Comanche woman moved with quiet grace and confidence, her dark eyes showing intelligence and humor. She appeared to be about Sarah's age, but carried herself with the assurance of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Husband," Singing Bird said formally, though Sarah caught a warmth in her tone. "You return with an interesting addition to our family." Morningstar, Iron Bear's teenage daughter, hung back shyly, but studied Sarah with obvious curiosity. She was at that awkward age between childhood and womanhood, tall and gangly, but with her mother's graceful movements beginning to emerge. "Come," Singing Bird said to Sarah. "I will show you where you will sleep and what work needs to be done. Winter preparation waits for no one, not even refugees from the white world." The lodge was larger and more comfortable than Sarah had expected. Buffalo hides formed the walls, creating a space that felt surprisingly warm and private. Sleeping areas were arranged around a central fire pit, with neat storage areas for clothing, tools, and food supplies. Everything had its place and purpose. "You will sleep here," Singing Bird indicated a space near the lodge wall. "Your possessions will be safe in this parfleche bag. But first we must see if you can be useful." Sarah spent the remainder of the day learning tasks that challenged every assumption she had held about women's work. Singing Bird and Morningstar showed her how to prepare buffalo hide for various uses, how to make pemmican that would provide nutrition through the winter months, and how to identify and gather late-season plants that could provide food or medicine. The work was harder than anything Sarah had done at the trading post. Her hands, soft from indoor work, quickly became raw from scraping hides. Her back ached from bending over food preparation, and her arms trembled from unfamiliar motions. But she didn't complain, partly from determination and partly from growing awareness of how much skill these tasks required. "White women think our work is simple because they see us using our hands," Singing Bird explained as she demonstrated the proper technique for softening leather. "But every motion requires knowledge passed down through generations. The timing, the pressure, the selection of materials, all of this must be learned." Other women from the camp began stopping by to observe Sarah's progress. Some offered advice or correction. Others simply watched with expressions that ranged from amusement to skepticism. Sarah understood she was being evaluated constantly, her every action noted and discussed. During the evening meal, Sarah sat with Iron Bear's family around their fire and tried her first taste of a stew made from ingredients she couldn't identify. The flavors were complex and nourishing, though completely unfamiliar to her palate trained on simple frontier foods. "The white soldiers came through our territory last moon," Iron Bear told his family while they ate. "They were looking for raiding parties but found nothing. Still, their presence makes trading with the settlements more dangerous." Sarah realized this information had implications for her situation. If tensions between the Comanche and white settlers were increasing, her presence in the camp could become problematic for everyone. "Will my being here cause difficulties for your people?" she asked directly. Iron Bear considered the question seriously. "Perhaps, but winter is coming, and survival concerns outweigh political ones. If you prove yourself valuable, the band will accept you. If not, we will deal with that problem when spring arrives." As the evening progressed and the camp settled into nighttime routines, Sarah lay in her new sleeping area and listened to the unfamiliar sounds around her. Children laughed and played. Adults spoke in quiet tones about the next day's work. Horses moved restlessly in their grazing areas. It was completely different from the lonely silence of her trading post, but somehow more comforting. For the first time since Thomas died, Sarah fell asleep surrounded by the sounds of human community, though she knew her place in that community was far from secure. 3 weeks into winter, Sarah's hands had become calloused and strong from constant work with leather, wood, and fiber. Her body had adapted to the different rhythms of Comanche life, rising before dawn to tend fires, working steadily through The day on essential tasks and sleeping deeply despite the cold that penetrated even the well-constructed lodges. The real test came when Singing Bird fell ill with a fever that left her weak and unable to work for several days. Grandmother Spider appeared at the lodge entrance on the second morning of Singing Bird's illness and fixed Sarah with a direct stare. "Now we see what you are truly worth," the old woman announced. "Can you keep this household functioning while the wife recovers? Can you care for the sick, maintain the work, and still contribute to the camp's needs?" Sarah felt the weight of everyone's expectations, but she also felt something new, confidence born from weeks of learning and practice. She had mastered enough essential skills to function independently, and more importantly, she had begun to understand the interconnected nature of everything in the camp. "I will do my best," she replied simply, knowing that elaborate promises meant nothing compared to actual performance. Morningstar proved to be an invaluable ally during her mother's illness. The teenage girl had absorbed years of knowledge about household management and stepped naturally into a supporting role. Together, they maintained the lodge, prepared meals, and continued the essential work of winter preparation. But Sarah's real breakthrough came when she applied her trading post experience to a problem the entire camp was facing. The band's supply of metal tools was running low, and several essential items had broken beyond repair. Sarah realized that her knowledge of white settlements and trade goods could provide a solution. "I know where there are abandoned homesteads between here and the nearest town," she told Iron Bear during an evening meal. "Families who gave up and moved on, leaving their tools and metal goods behind. If a small group could safely reach those places, we could gather what's needed." Iron Bear looked up from his food with interest. This would be dangerous. White soldiers patrol those areas, and any Comanche found there would be assumed to be raiders. "But I could go," Sarah said, the idea forming as she spoke. "I look like a settler woman. If anyone sees me, they'll think I'm just salvaging from abandoned places, which isn't unusual. I know the locations and what to look for." Running Wolf and Swift Arrow exchanged glances with their father. This was exactly the kind of contribution they had hoped she might provide, not just the ability to survive among them, but skills that could benefit the entire band. "The risk would be great," Iron Bear said slowly. "If something went wrong, we could not help you. And if soldiers captured you, they might force you to reveal our winter camp location." Sarah understood the implications. They were considering whether to trust her not just with her own life, but with the safety of everyone in the camp. "I would rather die than betray you," she said quietly. "You gave me life when I had none. I will not repay that gift with treachery." Grandmother Spider, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the lodge. "The white woman speaks like someone who understands loyalty. But words in a warm lodge are different from choices made under pressure. How do we know she will not break when tested?" Sarah thought about this question for several moments before answering. "You don't know, and neither do I. But I can tell you this. Everything I was before is gone. My husband is dead. My trading post is empty. My old life is finished. This camp, these people, this new way of living, this is all I have now. Betraying you would be betraying myself." The older woman nodded slowly, but her expression remained thoughtful. "Iron Bear, bring this matter to the council. Let the band leaders decide if this risk is worth taking." 2 days later, the council reached their decision. Sarah would be allowed to make the journey to the abandoned settlements, but she would not go alone. Swift Arrow would accompany her, staying hidden but close enough to help if things went wrong. If she successfully gathered needed supplies and returned safely, she would be considered a full member of the band rather than a temporary refugee. The expedition took place during a stretch of clear, cold weather that made travel possible but dangerous. Sarah wore her old settler clothing and carried a worn pack, looking exactly like a desperate woman salvaging what she could from failed homesteads. Swift Arrow remained invisible, moving parallel to her route but never showing himself. The first abandoned farm yielded an axe head, several metal cooking pots, and some hand tools that could be repaired. Sarah felt a strange sadness walking through the empty house, recognizing the dreams that had died there. A family had tried to build a life, failed, and moved on, leaving behind the remnants of their hopes. At the second location, things became complicated. As Sarah was loading useful items into her pack, she heard horses approaching. She quickly moved to a position where she could observe without being seen, and watched two cavalry soldiers ride up to investigate the farm. "Looks like someone's been through here recently," one soldier commented, dismounting to examine the ground around the house. "Fresh footprints, and some of the stuff's been moved around." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized they might track her movements. But her weeks of training with Iron Bear's family had taught her something about moving without leaving obvious signs. She had been careful to disturb as little as possible, and to step on rocks and hard ground whenever she could. "Probably just some settler woman looking for anything useful," the second soldier replied, studying the tracks. "Heading east, looks like. Maybe trying to get back to her family after her man gave up on farming." Sarah held her breath as they searched the area more thoroughly. If they found her pack or traced her route, both she and Swift Arrow would be in serious danger. But after 20 minutes of investigation, the soldiers mounted their horses and continued on their patrol. She waited another hour before emerging from her hiding place, and when she did, Swift Arrow appeared beside her like a shadow becoming solid. He had been close enough to help if needed, but had also remained completely invisible to the searching soldiers. "You did well," he said simply. "You moved like one of our people, not like a white woman crashing through the woods." They completed their circuit of abandoned settlements without further incident, gathering enough metal tools and useful items to significantly improve the band's winter prospects. But more importantly for Sarah, she had proven her loyalty and competence under pressure. When they returned to the winter camp, Grandmother Spider examined their haul of salvaged goods and then studied Sarah's face carefully. "You have done well, White Doe, but I think it is time you had a proper name among our people." The naming ceremony took place that evening around the central fire. The entire band gathered to witness Sarah's transition from temporary refugee to accepted member of their community. Grandmother Spider spoke first, recounting Sarah's journey from desperate widow to contributing member of the band. "She came to us with nothing but the courage to choose survival over comfort," the old woman announced. "She has learned our ways without trying to change them to suit her preferences. She has risked her life for the good of all our people. From this night forward, she will be known as Tradesfar, for she travels between worlds to bring our people what they need." Iron Bear stepped forward and placed a feather in Sarah's hair. Not the elaborate war bonnet of a warrior, but a simple marker indicating her acceptance into the band. "Welcome, Tradesfar, daughter of our people." As winter deepened around the camp, Sarah, now Tradesfar, settled into her new identity with a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She had not just survived the transformation. From white settler to Comanche band member, she had found a home. Spring arrived with sudden violence, bringing torrential rains that turned the peaceful winter valley into a muddy maze of swollen streams and unstable ground. The careful organization of the winter camp became chaos as families struggled to keep their lodges dry and their supplies protected from the flooding. Tradesfar found herself at the center of the crisis when the main stream that provided the camp's water supply changed course during a particularly heavy storm. The new channel threatened to undermine several lodges and had already begun washing away the carefully maintained food storage areas. "We must move the entire camp," Iron Bear announced during an emergency council meeting. "The water is too unpredictable now and the ground is too soft to rebuild here." But Grandmother Spider shook her head firmly. "Moving camp in this weather would be more dangerous than staying. We would lose everything we cannot carry, and the weak ones might not survive the journey through this mud." The band faced a terrible choice: risk staying in an increasingly dangerous location, or risk a difficult move in weather that had already claimed lives in other tribes that season. As the debate continued, Tradesfar realized she might have a solution, though it would require her to draw on knowledge from both her white and Comanche experiences. "There is another way," she said, standing slowly in the circle of leaders. "At my trading post, we had problems with water during heavy rains. My husband and I learned to redirect water flow using channels and barriers. It might work here." Several of the older warriors looked skeptical. This white woman was suggesting they alter the landscape itself. rather than adapt to its changes, something that went against traditional Comanche approaches to living with the land. Water finds its own path, one elder commented. Fighting against its nature brings only greater flooding later. I'm not talking about fighting the water, Tradesfar replied carefully. I'm talking about giving it a better path, one that serves both the water's needs and ours. We would work with the water's nature, not against it. Iron Bear studied the swollen stream and the threatened lodges. Show us what you mean. Over the next 2 days, Tradesfar directed a project unlike anything the band had attempted before. Using techniques she had learned from Thomas combined with Comanche knowledge of local materials and weather patterns, they built a series of small diversions that encouraged the stream to flow around the camp rather than through it. The work required everyone, men, women, children, and elders, to contribute according to their abilities. They used willow branches and stones to create barriers, dug channels to guide water flow, and built elevated areas where the most critical supplies could be stored safely. Morningstar proved particularly helpful, her young energy and quick understanding making her invaluable for the detailed work of weaving branch barriers. It's like basket work but with the whole landscape, she commented as they worked together on a particularly tricky section. Swift Arrow initially resisted the project, convinced that traditional methods of simply moving to higher ground would be more reliable. But as the water diversions began working, he found himself impressed despite his skepticism. I did not believe water could be reasoned with, he admitted to Tradesfar as they watched the stream flowing peacefully in its new course. But you have shown it a better path and it seems content to follow. The real test came during the season's worst storm, a 3-day deluge that would have washed away the original camp entirely. But the new water management system held, keeping the living areas dry while safely channeling the floodwaters around the settlement. When the storm finally ended, the band emerged to find their camp not just surviving, but actually improved. The redirected water had created new grazing areas for their horses and provided better access to fishing spots that had been difficult to reach before. Grandmother Spider walked the entire circuit of the water channels, examining each section carefully. When she returned to the central area, she was smiling, something Tradesfar had rarely seen from the serious old woman. You have given us something new, she told Tradesfar. Not just protection from this storm, but knowledge we can use in other places, other seasons. This is the gift of someone who belongs truly to our people. But the success of the water project brought unexpected challenges. Word of the band's innovative flood control spread to other Comanche groups, and some viewed the adoption of white techniques as a dangerous departure from traditional ways. A delegation from another band arrived to investigate these reports. Their leader, a warrior named Blackhorse, made no effort to hide his disapproval of what he saw as contamination by white influences. Iron Bear, you have allowed this white woman to change the way your people live, Blackhorse declared during a tense meeting. Next, you will be building log houses and farming like the settlers. How far will you let her lead you from the ways of our ancestors? The accusation stung because it touched on fears that some members of Iron Bear's band had been harboring. Were they losing their identity by adopting techniques from the white world? Was survival worth the cost if it meant abandoning traditional practices? Iron Bear stood slowly, his expression serious but calm. Our ancestors survived because they learned what worked and discarded what did not. They adopted horses from the Spanish, metal tools from traders, and new weapons when they proved useful. Adaptation is not betrayal, it is wisdom. But Blackhorse was not satisfied. Those things came from trading, from taking what served us without changing who we are. This woman has made you reshape the land itself. This is not the Comanche way. Tradesfar realized the moment had come for her to defend not just her own place in the band, but the legitimacy of the changes she had helped bring about. She stood and faced Blackhorse directly. I have not asked anyone to stop being Comanche, she said clearly. I offered knowledge that might help people survive a dangerous situation. The elders and warriors of this band chose whether to use that knowledge or not. The water channels work because we combined my understanding of water flow with their knowledge of local materials and weather patterns. She gestured toward the successful flood management system. Look at what we built together. Is it white? Is it Comanche? It is something new, something that belongs to the people who made it. My knowledge alone could not have created this. Their skills alone could not have solved the flooding problem. Together, We found an answer. Black Horse studied the water channels carefully, clearly impressed despite his ideological objections. The system was obviously effective, and it had been built using materials and techniques that respected the landscape rather than dominating it. After a long silence, he spoke again, his tone less hostile but still cautious. Perhaps there is wisdom in what you say, but changes like this should not be made lightly. The old ways have kept our people alive for generations. The old ways will always be honored, Tradesfar replied. But survival sometimes requires new solutions to new problems. The flooding this spring was worse than anyone remembered. Traditional responses might not have been enough. The debate continued for several days, with members of both bands sharing stories and observations about the changing nature of survival on the frontier. What emerged from these discussions was a recognition that the world itself was changing rapidly, and rigid adherence to old methods might not always serve the people's best interests. Black Horse's band had faced their own challenges that spring. A late freeze had killed many of the plants they traditionally relied on for medicine, and several of their horses had been lost to a disease that their usual remedies could not cure. They had survived, but barely, and the experience had left them wondering if they needed new approaches to new problems. Perhaps we could benefit from sharing knowledge between our bands, Black Horse suggested finally, not to abandon our ways, but to strengthen them with wisdom that serves our people's survival. This proposal led to an unprecedented gathering, a spring council where multiple bands shared not just traditional knowledge, but new techniques and adaptations they had developed to deal with changing conditions. Tradesfar found herself in the unique position of facilitating discussions between groups who might not otherwise have trusted each other. Her ability to translate concepts between different ways of thinking, white and Comanche, traditional and innovative, practical and spiritual, made her valuable as more than just a band member. She was becoming a bridge between worlds, helping people find common ground even when their starting points were very different. During one particularly productive session, an elderly medicine woman from Black Horse's band shared her knowledge of plant alternatives when traditional remedies were not available, while Singing Bird demonstrated new techniques for food preservation that extended winter supplies. Swift Arrow showed visitors the water management system and explained how similar principles might be applied to other landscape challenges. Knowledge belongs to all our people, Grandmother Spider observed as the gathering concluded. When we share what works and learn from each other's successes, we all become stronger. As summer approached and the various bands prepared to separate for their warm season activities, Tradesfar realized she had found something she had never possessed even during her happiest days at the trading post, a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own survival and comfort. She was no longer just a white woman who had learned to live like a Comanche, or even a Comanche who remembered her white origins. She had become something new entirely, a person whose identity transcended the boundaries that had once seemed so fixed and important. The success of the spring gathering led to an invitation that would test this new identity in ways she could not have imagined. A large intertribal council was being planned for midsummer, bringing together bands from across the southern plains to discuss the increasing pressure from white settlement and military activity. "They want you to attend as a translator and advisor," Iron Bear told her as they prepared for the summer buffalo hunt. "Your knowledge of white customs and language could be valuable in understanding what we face and planning our responses." Tradesfar understood this was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility. The decisions made at such a gathering could affect the lives of thousands of people, and her advice might influence choices between peace and war, accommodation and resistance. "I will go if the council wants me," she replied. "But I need you to understand something. I am no longer the white woman who came to your winter camp seeking shelter. Whatever wisdom I offer will come from my loyalty to our people and our way of life, not from my memories of how white people think." Iron Bear smiled at her use of the word "our," a small indicator of how completely she had internalized her new identity. "I know this, Tradesfar. That is exactly why your counsel will be trusted." As spring turned toward summer and the band prepared to leave their flood-protected valley, Tradesfar looked back at the water channels that had saved them all. The system continued to work perfectly, directing the stream around the camp while creating new areas of fertility and abundance. But more than the physical changes to the landscape, She was proud of what the project had demonstrated about the possibilities that opened when people combined different kinds of knowledge in service of common survival. She had not just found a home among the Comanche. She had helped create new ways of building homes that could withstand the storms ahead. The Great Summer Council gathered near the Arkansas River, where traditional meeting grounds had hosted intertribal gatherings for generations. Tradesfar had never seen so many Comanche together in one place. Nearly 3,000 people representing dozens of bands from across the southern plains, along with allied groups from other tribes who faced similar pressures from expanding white settlement. The scale of the gathering was overwhelming, but what struck her most was the diversity of responses to the changing world. Some bands had maintained traditional ways almost completely. Others had adopted various white technologies and practices, and still others had developed entirely new approaches that blended old and new knowledge. "Look around you," Iron Bear said as they established their camp among the vast circle of lodges. "Every group here has faced the same choice you faced at your trading post: adapt or die. The question for this council is whether we can find ways to adapt together, or whether we will be forced to face the future as scattered, weakened bands." Tradesfar quickly discovered that her reputation had preceded her. Stories of the flood control project and the successful spring gathering had spread among the bands, and many people were curious about the white woman who had become Comanche. Some approached her with respect and interest, others with suspicion or hostility, and a few with desperate hope that she might have solutions to their own impossible problems. On the third day of the council, she was formally invited to address the assembled chiefs and war leaders. The honor was unprecedented. No white person, and certainly no woman who had not been born Comanche, had ever spoken to such a gathering. But these were unprecedented times, and traditional protocols were being adapted to meet extraordinary circumstances. "I stand before you not as the white woman I once was, nor as someone pretending to be something I am not," she began, speaking in the mixture of English and Comanche that had become natural to her. "I speak as Tradesfar, daughter of Iron Bear's band, someone who has learned that survival sometimes requires us to become more than we were before." The crowd listened intently as she described her journey, from desperate widow to contributing member of Comanche society. But she focused not on her personal transformation, but on the lessons that experience had taught about adaptation and survival. "The white settlements are not going to disappear," she said plainly. "The soldiers are not going to stop coming, and the treaties they make will be broken when it serves their purposes. But that does not mean our people are doomed to disappear or surrender everything that makes them Comanche." She gestured toward the diverse gathering around her. "Look at what you have accomplished just by coming together like this. Bands that might have fought each other are sharing knowledge and resources. Problems that seemed impossible for one group to solve become manageable when many groups work together." Her central message was that the Comanche nations could survive the white invasion, but only by becoming something larger and more flexible than they had ever been before. This would require difficult changes and painful compromises, but the alternative was gradual destruction. "I have lived in both worlds," she continued. "I know the white people will keep coming because they see this land as empty space to be filled, not as the home of established peoples. But I also know they are not as strong or as unified as they appear. They fight among themselves, their leaders change constantly, and their plans are often foolish and short-sighted." Some of the chiefs nodded at this assessment, having observed the same patterns in their dealings with various white authorities. But others remained skeptical about any strategy that did not involve simply driving all whites from Comanche territory. "What do you propose we do with this knowledge?" asked Red Buffalo, a war leader whose band had been fighting white settlers for years. "How does understanding white weakness help us when they have more soldiers and better weapons?" Tradesfar had anticipated this question, and her answer drew on everything she had learned about survival from both cultures. "We become what they do not expect us to be. We learn their languages and their laws so we can use both against them when necessary. We adopt their useful technologies without adopting their values. We form alliances they cannot predict or prevent." She outlined a strategy that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. A coordinated response that combined traditional Comanche mobility and warfare skills with new approaches to diplomacy, trade, and political organization. Some bands would continue traditional hunting and raiding. Others would experiment with selective adoption of white practices. and still others would specialize in maintaining relationships with white authorities and traders. But all of this requires trust between our bands that has never existed before, she acknowledged. It requires sharing information and resources in ways that go against generations of independence and competition. The debate that followed was intense and sometimes heated, but gradually a consensus emerged. The traditional approach of each band operating independently was no longer adequate to the challenges they faced. Some form of greater coordination and cooperation was necessary, even if it meant significant changes to traditional practices. Grandmother Spider, who had traveled to the council specifically to support Tradesfar's participation, stood to address the gathering. At nearly 80 years old, she commanded respect from every person present. "I have lived long enough to see our world change in ways our grandmothers could not have imagined," the elder said. "The buffalo herds are smaller, the white settlements are larger, and the old ways of solving problems no longer work as they once did. But our people have always survived by learning and adapting." She gestured toward Tradesfar. "This woman shows us that it is possible to change completely and still remain true to what matters most. She gave up everything she was to become one of us, and in doing so, she has helped us see new possibilities for what we can become." The council's final decision established a new form of intertribal organization, not the rigid hierarchy that white governments preferred, but a flexible network of relationships that allowed for coordinated action when necessary, while preserving band autonomy for daily life. Tradesfar was appointed as one of several translators and cultural advisors who would help facilitate communication between the Comanche Confederation and various white authorities. As the great gathering dispersed and the various bands prepared to return to their territories, Tradesfar reflected on how completely her life had changed in less than a year. She had begun as Sarah Matthews, a desperate widow facing certain death alone on the frontier. Now she was Tradesfar, a respected member of a powerful confederation, someone whose advice was sought by leaders who commanded thousands of warriors. But the most important change was not in her status or responsibilities. It was in her understanding of what survival really meant. It was not just about staying alive through individual determination and luck. True survival meant finding ways to adapt and grow stronger, to build connections and communities that could withstand whatever challenges the future might bring. Iron Bear found her sitting by their campfire on the last night of the council, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked, settling beside her with the comfortable familiarity of family. "I don't think anyone can be ready for changes this large," she replied honestly, "but I'm no longer afraid of becoming someone different than I was. I've learned that transformation can be a form of strength, not just something that happens to you." The feather in her hair, worn now for months, caught the firelight as she turned to look at the vast camp around them. Tomorrow, these thousands of people would scatter across the plains to face an uncertain future. But they would face it together in ways they never had before, and that made all the difference. Tradesfar had found her home not in a place, but in a people who had taught her that survival and identity could both be choices rather than accidents of birth. The woman who had traded everything just to survive had received far more than she had given up. She had gained a future that extended far beyond her own life, and a purpose that would outlast any individual story.